No
So
problem. Thanks for inviting me.
yeah, I thought we'd talk about metaethics and the grounding for morality.
All right.
So first of all, before getting into like the details and stuff, I just wanted to like see what your general definition of like a value is. Like, what is a value for you?
Mm,
How would you define it?
um, don't know. Yeah, I don't have a definition of what a value is. Sorry. I don't.
Okay,
Uh,
okay. So
I don't.
maybe
I mean,
yeah.
yeah. I don't really. I. I mean, okay. There's a couple of ways we can approach this, right? Which is you could be asking me for a sort of conceptual analysis of the term value.
Hmm.
I mean, or you might just be asking me to sort of like how would I explain the word value to somebody who doesn't yet know the English language, right? I mean, those are quite different things. If it's a conceptual analysis of the term value, then I don't have one. There isn't any particular conceptual analysis of that I would favor. If you're asking me just sort of, how would I just kind of introduce the concept to somebody who doesn't yet know it, then I suppose there are things that I could try to answer that one. But yeah, I don't have any kind of theoretical definition of it.
Okay, um, so for you, the concept itself is somewhat nonsensical or like contradictory.
No, I don't think it's non. No, I think it's a perfectly fine concept. I mean, I would say that there are things that I value. I use terms like good and bad,
Hmm.
better and worse, right? I mean, I take it that these are value terms, um, and so it's just I mean, it's like if you ask me, well, how do you define a chair, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can tell you certain features that I would expect to find within a chair. I can say like, well, a chair is something that people sit on. It's supposed to help us, feel comfortable in certain situations. Chairs usually have four legs. Um, this particular chair is a swivelly chair. I mean, I can say things like that. I can describe various chairs that I've seen in the context in which I encounter chairs. But if you ask me for a definition of a chair in the sense of something that like tells you the necessary and sufficient conditions that something has to meet in order to count as a chair,
Hmm.
I don't think I'd be able to do that. Um, but it's not like there's anything wrong with the concept of a chair. It's just not something that we give necessary and sufficient conditions for. Um, so I feel like the same is the case for values. I'm I mean I'm happy to use the term, and
Hmm.
I think we can talk about things that we value and things that we think are good and bad, things that we like and dislike, and all of that stuff. That's perfectly fine.
All right, all right. So okay, so for me conceptually, the way I use value is sort of like we can talk about value in two different categories. So there is value in terms of a means and value in terms of an end. So a sort of a means value would be something that we find valuable because it allows us to access something else that is in itself worthwhile, let's say. So for most people, an ethical rule like do not murder would be objectively a good rule because it would allow in the end some sort of account of happiness or some sort of account of social cohesion or something like that. And an end value would be the happiness itself. So
Mm-hmm.
for most people, if you ask them like why do you want to be happy or why do you want to be fulfilled, the very question wouldn't really make sense to them because it's sort of um, it's difficult to say exactly how it works, but it's sort of in it of itself valuable, right? It's intrinsically good for some people, right?
Okay.
Okay, so using this sort of conception of values, means values, and end values, uh, I want to make the case that there is at least one stance independent and subject independent end value. So something that is maybe we could say like a categorical imperative or something like that, that is independent of anyone's subjective opinions or feelings or whatever. So I would like to do that by presenting a sort of argument that basically tries to establish a minimal conception of teleology. So a minimal conception of at least one teleological cause. And it will go something like this. So all contingent facts require an explanation. Of course, we will get into every premise more closely. So all contingent facts require an explanation. All physical entities are contingent facts. The set of all contingent facts cannot be sufficiently explained by another
Okay,
contingent
wait a
fact.
second. Hang on.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to write this down
All right,
because
right.
I feel like
Yeah.
this is okay. You're coming at me with a lot of premises here. So
Yeah, of course.
we got all contingent facts require an explanation.
Yeah.
And then what's the next one?
All physical entities are contingent facts.
Okay.
The set of all contingent facts cannot be sufficiently explained by another contingent fact.
Yeah.
So then we arrive to the first conclusion, which is that the set of all contingent facts cannot be sufficiently explained by a physical fact or a physical entity.
Okay.
And if we accept this, then we go to a different premise, which is only a teleological cause or a value cause can plausibly explain the set of all contingent facts. And the conclusion, existence has a teleological cause.
Right.
Okay, so of course that's a lot of premises, a lot of maybe propositions. So before defending any of this and explaining why I come to find it as reasonable, what are your first impressions?
I don't think I agree with any of it.
Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, I feel like this is just not the sort of approach that I take to this to anything. I mean, I don't know how much detail do you want me to go into in terms of my
I
first
mean,
impressions?
for example, do you disagree with, like, for example, the first premise that contingent facts require an explanation?
Yes, I don't accept any of the premises.
Okay. Can I know why?
Yeah, so with respect to the claim that all contingent facts require an explanation, I just don't see any reason to believe that. With respect to the claim that all physical entities are contingent facts, I think that is going to end up appealing to a modal epistemology that I'm probably not going to get on board with. I mean, I think that so the sort of stance that I take on this is that we should have like much less confidence in our modal judgments with respect to metaphysical questions than is common in philosophy. I think that I tend to be a pretty hardcore modal skeptic, but for the purposes of just for the sake of argument, I'll kind of get on board with like everyday modal facts. So if I say something like, this table could have been 2 foot to the left. Actually, it couldn't have been 2 foot. There's a wall there. But if I say this table could have been, 2 foot in a different direction, then I'm like, okay, fine. And we sort of get to that by just kind of recognizing that, like, well, I can literally just lift up this table and sort of move it, right? Or, I've seen other objects placed in the room, and there's no obstacle to the table being 2 foot in a different direction. If I say something like, there's it's necessarily the case that if you have sort of 2 mountains right next to each other, then there's a valley in the middle. Then again, it's like, well, it seems like if I just take two mountains, then like almost by definition you get the valley in the middle. So that sort of necessity claim, okay, I can kind of get on board with that. But when it comes to these sort of broad claims about metaphysics, and we're saying, well, all physical entities are contingent. I don't see why. I don't see why that, for all we know, the I don't know, maybe the initial conditions or something like that are just necessary. That seems possible. I don't know how we would rule that out on the basis of certainly not on the basis of the sorts of reasoning that the sorts of reasonings that we use, the sorts of reasons that we appeal to when it comes to getting everyday modal knowledge. I don't think are going to help us much here, and I don't really see any other way of getting to a conclusion about these sorts of metaphysical claims, or claims regarding metaphysical modality. So so the second premise I would reject. I think the trouble with so when it comes to this third premise, set of all contingent facts, actually, I mean, so I get the point there, which is, if you have a set of all contingent facts, then if you were to suppose that this was explained by another contingent fact, then you don't at least initially have a set of all contingent facts. I mean, you'd either be saying there's some contingent fact outside the set of all contingent facts, which would mean that you just don't initially have a set of all contingent facts,
Yeah.
or you would be saying that the set of all contingent facts somehow explains itself. And then that's going to somehow violate what we regard as a requirement for a good explanation or something like that. So actually, when I said I have a problem with all premises, maybe but the problem with this one is that it's not obvious to me that that there is such a thing as the set of all contingent facts. So I guess I would kind of have a problem with the way that this is being framed. And so I think that would maybe do as like an initial brief outline of some of the issues I have with this type of argument. Yeah.
Okay, so to begin with, about the first two premises, so that contingent facts sort of require an explanation. I mean, to me, it seems almost like a matter of experience, like a matter of empirical experience, because when you think about it, you wouldn't see any contingent fact in your life and say like there is no explanation for that. It would seem completely irrational, right? So like you said with the table, it could have been in a different place, etc. And there is almost always some sort of explanation that tells us why it is exactly in the place that it is. So I don't see how a contingent fact could not require an explanation. I mean, I cannot think of a single example of that. For example, no matter if we're talking about like physical stuff in this room, outside, whatever, anything, it just seems that it could plausibly be completely different, and yet it isn't. And this almost creates an epistemic need to sort of explain why that is. You wouldn't just say, well, I don't know, it's a brute fact that this tree is there. Well, that tree is there because, I don't know, someone planted it some years ago, etc. There is almost always an explanation in regards to our previous experience. So I don't see why we would doubt that this would be the case for all other contingent facts as well. I mean, if every single kind of entity had a certain quality, then we wouldn't doubt that the exact next that we're going to examine will also have that quality. So unless we're going to be like complete skeptics.
Yeah, I mean, who do you think you're talking to? I mean, I don't know, dude. I mean, hey, I don't have a problem with brute facts. Seems fine to me. Doesn't seem like there's any issue with there being, I mean, I can easily imagine. I think maybe I can't. Maybe I'm fooling myself. But it seems easy to me to imagine that there could just be like a tree and it's just there and there's just no reason why it's there. Now, as it happens in practice, of course, we choose to look for explanations, and when we choose to look for explanations, this allows us to get things like science and philosophy and all of that, and we get to construct these lovely theories, and they give us a feeling of understanding, and they allow us to make predictions, and they allow us to control the phenomena and all of this. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
that's great. I think that our decisions, our desire for explanation is a good thing, right? But I don't think that that's a good reason to infer that just everything in the universe has an explanation. I just that I just don't see that. It seems fine that there just might be some just brute facts, and there's just no reason at all why they are the way they are. I mean, if you wanted an example of this, well, possibly. I mean, like I don't really like appealing to quantum mechanics in this sort of context because there are so many different interpretations of it. But I mean, there are interpretations of quantum mechanics which would have it that sometimes things just happen and there isn't any further reason for it. So an atom might, like, why did the atom decay at this time rather than this later time? Well, just decayed then, and that's it, and there's just nothing further to say. Now, as it happens, I think probably what we would do in practice is we would still look for the something further. We would
Yeah.
still try to find some further, but that's just what we're doing, right? We choose to do that. And I suppose methodologically maybe we can say, as a sort of methodological principle, I suppose it makes sense to say, look, we're always going to search for a further explanation because for all we know, there is a further explanation, and it would be nice to have it. But I just don't make the inference from that sort of methodological principle that, well, this is some metaphysical feature of the universe, that like that's how it, like, there really is this reason out there that
Mm-hmm.
that makes it the case that this thing happened.
Yeah. Well, I guess even in quantum mechanics, you would still need some sort of idea of probability and just
I
basic
don't
math.
think that helps you much here, though, because if I mean, so yes, we would be able to say, well, there's the atom has a certain half-life, let's say, right? So we can describe the probability that it will decay at a particular time. But the point is the specific fact that we're being asked to explain is, well, why did it decay at this time? Like, why did it decay at exactly 10 o'clock rather than 10 o'clock and 1 second? Um, and it, I mean, of course, we can say, well, there was a sort of 50% probability of it decaying at 10 o'clock. But that doesn't really explain why it decayed at 10 o'clock rather than 10 o'clock and 1 second, because like there'd also be a certain probability that it decays at 10 o'clock and 1 second, right?
Yeah, I guess. Well, the main phenomenon, though, if we understand how the phenomenon in general works, and we can attribute a certain probability to something happening at exactly 10 o'clock, or 10 and 1 minute, or 10 and 2 minutes, or whatever, and we just cannot predict exactly at which moment it would. Uh, I don't see how that lacks an explanation. It just seems that the sort of explanation that it has contains some idea of maybe randomness or maybe indetermination, but within the context of something that has explanatory power, something that has some amount of probability. So, to me, when we're talking about something as fundamental as like existence itself, as like the the literal like act of existence being, right, of existence being here, uh it just seems that, I don't know, at least you would need some sort of uh I don't think that a mathematical explanation works as well. I will explain why, but you would need some sort of explanation as to why, at least in my opinion, because again, even at the quantum mechanics and that sort of problem, there is still a general field of explanation. It's just that within it there is room for indeterminism and stuff like that. So I don't know if that's accurate, but
I mean, it seems I'm still not really seeing what the explanation is of the specific fact um, that it decays at this exact time. Uh, like I mean, I don't know how being told that, because like part of what we're trying to explain is like, well, why did it decay why did it decay now rather than later? And actually, I mean, sometimes this kind of appeal to probability might still leave things a little bit mysterious, because let's say that the atom has a half-life of like a billion years, and then it decays within 10 seconds. So the probability that it decays within 10 seconds is vanishingly small. And so that doesn't feel like it seems sort of odd to say, well, we have this fact, like, why did this happen? And then we cite something which would show that it has a vanishingly small probability of occurring. That doesn't seem like a very good explanation.
I mean,
But
maybe a good parallel to
maybe
that.
we're happy with that. I don't know. I mean, obviously, a lot of this is also going to depend on what you count as, what your standards are for a good explanation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But then that, to me, sort of again makes it a bit weird to talk about explanation like it's this, mind independent thing out there rather than just something that we're doing. So
Yeah, I mean, a good parallel here would perhaps be like, imagine you were throwing a dice and it has like many sides, and certain sides, because of the angle that they have or because of the way in which the dice is going to land, has a very low probability of coming up on top. But I mean, there is still an explanation about why even a specific side on the dice came up top, which is that there is a dice there and that you're throwing the dice. So that would
well,
be analogous to like the system within what quantum mechanics works with.
Well, I think the explanation. So in the case of the dice, I can see that we do have a specific explanation because, I mean, ultimately, I suppose the thought is that with the dice, we can, describe the exact movements of the particles. I mean, we might not be aware of them, but in principle, at least, right, we could look at the exact motion of, this set of particles, and then, like there's going to be an extremely, it's going to be extremely complex, right? But there's going to be some like causal factor that leads to this side coming up rather than the other side coming up. Whereas, I mean, as I understand it, that the point in the case of quantum mechanics is that you don't have anything further to appeal to, like there are no hidden variables, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least again on some of the interpretations. So I don't know. It's
Yeah, I think it's more of an analogy about the mechanism we're talking about, not exactly. I'm not painting an exact analogy in that, like, in just the same way that a dice, you can like see how the particles move and stuff, and understand why it landed in a specific way. The analogy I'm trying to make is the thing about the randomness or the low probability, which is like you can have a mechanism that explains a phenomenon, and within that mechanism, it is inherent that there is going to be a very low probability of one thing happening over another. I don't see why that's a problem about explanation.
Okay. So as far as you're all right then. As far as you're concerned, the case of that sort of example, that would still count as a perfectly adequate explanation. So if I said why did the atom decay right now rather than later, like saying that. So let's say the atom decays in 10 seconds, and we say, well, the explanation for that is that the atom has a half-life of a billion years, right? That's the explanation, and you're happy with that. That's a perfectly sufficient explanation in your view.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
if we're describing the phenomenon, I think it's a good explanation. But what I'm pointing to with my sort of argument is that even that explanation, if we take all of these kinds of explanations about reality, about the external world, I think there is still a question there, which is there's a certain sense in which these explanations do not really explain sufficiently. I mean, you can have
what is it to give a sufficient explanation?
I will explain. I will explain right now. Which is, look, you can have an efficient explanation, an efficient cause maybe. So for example, in the case of the quantum mechanics, it's like the dice that I talked about. So, and to me, that description would be a fine explanation in regards to whether it's efficient to explain how it came to be. But I think the problem I have is that if we look at the whole set of all contingent facts, and I think the quantum mechanics example is also part of those contingent facts, there's still a question of like why, but in a why in a different sense, not a why in the sense of what efficient cause caused this first thing to do this first thing, etc. It's more like an efficient explanation needs to give an account that isn't completely absurd, I guess, because to me it just seems absurd to say, you know, this is, like, here's this one thing, this is, and no further explanation is needed. It seems not just absurd, it seems that it lacks explanation. And perhaps you can make the case that it can be efficient enough to say that something is necessarily existent. But even if it is efficient to say that, although I'm not really sure that that's the case, even if it is an efficient explanation, an efficient cause to say that the thing wasn't caused by anything, it was just necessary, I think there is still a side of explanation that is missing there. I don't know if I'm communicating it correctly, but yeah.
Okay, so how about the explanation that universe just popped into existence, just came from nothing, just started, and that's it?
Yeah, this to me, for example, this seems like a lack of explanation. This doesn't.
It seems
this
okay.
doesn't,
Why? It seems fine to me.
Yeah. Okay. So why does it seem like a lack of explanation? Because everything that is like, I would say, a descriptive type of fact. So maybe a descriptive fact in the sense that an is, right, not a not, an is. It seems that everything from our empirical experience that falls within the category of is can only be like an efficient cause of something. And to me, when we say the universe just popped into existence, it's almost like saying that an is can be something more than an efficient cause, because I think there's something more needed for a proper explanation of that fact. It's not just, again, it may be efficient. It may be that the answer of, well, the universe just popped into existence is physically true, right? It can be physically true, but it still doesn't explain something very important about the event that happened, which is that it is a contingent event. Even if it's, I know it sounds weird, even if it's necessary, there is a kind of way in which it is contingent, because sure, physically speaking, it is necessary, but still it's completely absurd. Like it doesn't make sense for it to be there and nothing more.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like it.
Yeah, maybe we just don't share this intuition, perhaps, or
well,
I don't know.
I mean, it makes sense. I feel like it makes sense. You know, I mean, so if there's just nothing, then you know, there's nothing to prevent something from just popping into existence. So I don't know. It seems fine to me. Like
I guess, but there is something.
The universe
to
just
it.
came up. You know, the universe just started.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
but
why not? Why shouldn't it have done?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yeah.
I think there is something that stops it, which is that if we think about like nothingness, if you actually have nothingness, that means you don't have even mathematical stuff. You don't have like the possibility of something occurring. So to me, in order for something to just pop into existence. There just seems to be a, a possibility for it to happen. If there is
Yeah,
no
I'm not sure how we're
possibility,
ruling out possibility there. Um, like, what would rule out the possibility of this happening?
the fact that if there is actually nothingness, there is no such concept. There is no possibility or, uh, I guess, logical rules and stuff like that.
Okay, if there's no logical rules, then what's the problem? What's stopping it?
I mean, for it to come into existence, it does need the possibility of existing. Otherwise,
Yeah, but I
how
can't
does it
see
come
what's
into existence?
like why are we assuming that there's no. I mean, so first of all, I guess this is slightly an odd way to talk about nothingness because we're kind of reifying it and assuming that there's this like state of nothingness out of which something came. But I mean, I'm just kind of going along with that because it's easy to talk about it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
But what I'm not seeing is like, okay, so if I imagine like a completely empty world where there's just nothing, so I can't see what's ruling out the possibility of there being something.
But there is no. But if it's actually nothing, there is no possibility.
Oh, I see what you're doing. So, okay, so this is right. So when I was thinking about nothing, I'm thinking of this in terms of possible worlds,
Yeah,
basically.
no, no, no. It's not.
Um,
It's not just
so now
physical nothingness.
we're imagining a situation where where there isn't even any possibility, right? Okay, but there's also okay. So in that case, right, we're saying no, there's literally nothing, right? It's not just that there's no physical stuff. There's also there's no like modal facts. There's no logical facts. There's no so there's absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, again, in that case, I would just go back to, well, nothing to prevent something coming into existence. Why would you even need there to be the possibility in that case? I mean, if there's no possibility, there's no impossibility either. If there's literally nothing, then there's no impossibilities. So
Yeah, but
again,
again,
doesn't seem to be a problem.
if there isn't any, I'm not saying that there is some impossibility. I mean, I guess I am saying it, but the issue I see is that if we're talking about nothingness, it seems that just as a matter of definition of what actual nothingness is, that there is like, if it's actual nothingness, nothing will happen because it's nothing. I can't put
I
it
don't see I don't see why we're assuming that it has to obey the rule that nothing will happen. Like why is that rule part of nothingness?
Yeah, I mean, we have to give a definition of what nothingness is. And I mean, if the definition of nothingness is that there is no physical stuff, there is no logical stuff, there is nothing, then to postulate that anything follows, like that a, I guess, I don't see how a world could come to be without the possibility of it coming to be, right?
Well, why would there need? I mean, so okay, um, why if you're saying that in a condition of absolute nothingness, there's not even any kind of logical rules, why would it obey the rule that in order for something to be, there has to be the possibility of it coming to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I guess my issue is that the world that we're talking about is the real world, right? It's the particular world in which we actually live. So we know some stuff about our world. So we
Mhm.
may not really comprehend what actual absolute nothingness uh, does, let's say, but we know some stuff about our world, and we know that our world generally works on the principle that if something happens, then it needs the possibility to happen. So I don't see how a world in which everything works like that could come into existence without following that. You know what I'm saying? So if the substance, the very substance of this world, this particular world, or the essence of it, let's say, is such that for things to happen, there needs to be the possibility that they happen. I don't see how that doesn't apply to all the whole set of things about the world. So the world itself.
Yeah, I just don't have any problem with the idea that the laws, let's say, just came into existence with the world. And if we're going with the notion of nothingness that you just described, then that I mean that's what you would say, right? Like, okay, well, there's absolutely nothing, so there's no laws, not even any laws of logic, and then poof, something comes into existence, and and then once you've got something in existence, you have certain laws, and then the things that are in existence obey those laws. That seems fine to me. I mean, like that strikes me as a perfectly, it scratches the explanatory itch, let's say.
Yeah. Uh, I guess I don't really see it because, again, I can't really understand how. I mean, if we're actually talking about nothing, uh, I get that because there are no logical laws, no laws whatsoever, etc., nothing is preventing any random thing from happening. But still, this doesn't seem like just a random thing. Sorry, a random thing that happened. Because first of all, for it to be a random thing, you need in the first place to have some sort of idea of randomness. So again,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not making any claim about the kind of thing. I'm not saying, well, there was some process, like some mechanism in place, that we could describe as random. To be clear, I'm just saying it just happened, and that's it.
yeah, I don't know. I don't see. I I I don't think that's. I don't think it's very plausible. Although I will have to think about it again. But I see what you're saying. Like, if there's actually nothing, I guess, like, we can't really say anything about if existence just is. I guess it can just be because absolute nothingness doesn't stop that from being the case in any way, because it doesn't have any rules, any content, etc. So I see that point, but and even still, don't you think that this, like, a sort of existence that is this particular, because I think nothingness is way more simple than existence, right? Because it literally has no content, no logic,
Mm.
no nothing. So
Well, if it doesn't have any properties, then we can't attribute the property of simplicity to it. So I don't know.
yeah, okay, that's a good point actually. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that again. I guess it's pretty baffling to talk about nothingness in general. It doesn't really.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, I suppose the way that people usually talk about this would not be in terms of absolute nothingness in the way that we. I mean, first of all, there is something a bit odd about treating nothingness as like a state, right,
Yeah.
out of which something might arise. Um, but I mean, I think that the general point could. I mean, I think the general points that have been made could probably be rephrased to avoid that way of putting it. But more generally, I think usually when people talk about nothingness, what they would mean is like the absence of any physical stuff. When we start talking about like the absence of logical laws, for instance, that starts to get into weird territory because I mean the usual view would be that, oh well, the logical laws must be necessary, so of course there couldn't be the
Mm-hmm.
absence of logical laws. But I'm quite happy to play around with denying the necessity of logical laws. So yeah, I mean
Mm-hmm.
I'll get on
Uh,
board with it.
what about a sort of an idea of nothingness, like not absolute nothingness, because now we fall into the problem of logic and stuff. What if we're talking about just the simplest possible state you can think about? So,
Mm-hmm.
if we have an absence of physical stuff, perhaps an absence of, like, even forms, if someone believes that there is such a thing as forms, etc. But we have maybe the basic logical laws, but we just have like this sort of thing, right? We have this territory that is completely simple and like almost infinitely more simple than any kind of existence, because it has none of the contents of any kind of existence. So I guess the problem would still stand, which is why is it that instead of having like something as simple as nothing, physically speaking, uh, you come to have out of that nothing like some sort of existence. I mean, it seems because it is almost infinitely more complicated just by definition. I guess the more complicated a phenomenon is, I guess the more of an explanation it demands.
Hmm. I don't know about that. I mean, so first of all, I would say, I'm actually quite happy with the idea of, again, just saying, well, why not? And I think that with this idea of, there's this nice analogy that's used by uh, Peter van Inwagen in a similar context. He says there was this thing that they used to do apparently in China, I think, where they would have like a massive crowd, and the crowd would hold up sheets of paper that are one side is red and one side is white, and if you shift the sheets of paper around in the right kind of way, you can create a large image, right? So you can imagine like this crowd of people holding up the paper in just the right way so that it creates an image of Chairman Mao, right? So this is the sort of context in which they would do this, in like parades and stuff in China, you'd have, 1,000 people holding up sheets of paper to create an image of Chairman Mao. Now, what we might say is, well, you can imagine them like holding up the sheets of paper so that they're all white, right? And in some sense, that's simpler than like the image that's created is simpler than if they were to hold up the sheets of paper in just a random way. Like if they held it up randomly, then you just get patterns of red and white, and well, there wouldn't be any particular image that you could distinguish. It would just look, just look random, right? Um, but but we wouldn't say that it's more likely that you're going to get the sheet of white than that you're just going to get a random jumble of red and white. Um, so I think we have to be quite careful when we say that simplicity is more likely. It's not. I mean, there are certainly contexts where that's fine, but I think the trouble is when we're talking about, well, the very origin of the universe itself. Um, I'm just not sure why I would assume that, let's say, the empty world is more likely than a world where there's stuff happening. In fact, I mean, you might think, well, hang on a minute, there's only one empty world, right? Like the world, there's a world where there's just no physical stuff, and then there's an infinite amount of worlds where there is physical stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
actually, you'd expect there to be, you'd expect a world with stuff in it to be more likely than an empty world if you look at it from that point of view. So I guess the thing is, I can see the point of view you're looking at it from, right? And I get the idea that, like, yeah, I mean, if there's nothing, right, just nothingness, that's kind of simpler, and so it's sort of more likely than having something. But I feel like I can just as easily adopt this other sort of point of view where it's like, okay, there's only one empty world and there's like loads of worlds with stuff in it, and then it does not look more likely that you're going to have an empty world. So I am not really sure, like what's the right point of view to look at this from. I don't know. I mean, it just seems like this is a problem that's so far outside our, any kind of ordinary experience that it's just hard to get a grasp on it. But I don't feel like there's anything problematic about just saying, yeah, there's just stuff, and why not?
Yeah. Okay, but wouldn't that sort of have to assume that there is this, uh, as you explained, there is this array of like whiteboards or white pieces of paper or whatever, and there's a certain there are certain ways in which you can put it up. It can be red or white, etc. But you are assuming that this actually like happened in the sense that if you have nothingness, physical nothingness, I don't see it as um, like out of all the possibilities of worlds, etc. There is this one possibility of this one world. It just seems that the very notion of the possibility of a world coming to be just doesn't work as a mechanism that just happens like that. Maybe it does, but it seems that the mechanism needed for nothing to be, like for no content to be there, is way more, again, way less complicated and way more uh, likely to be than the mechanism that would bring about like stuff.
There is no mechanism going at all here. So basically, I mean, look, there's various ways the world might be, and when we're talking about worlds here, we're just talking about the complete totality of everything. So any mechanism that we're talking about is going to be just part of the world, right? I mean, certainly if you had a mechanism bringing about the nothing, like an empty world, that wouldn't really make sense, because you would then have there would then be something, so it wouldn't be an empty world. Um, so the point is there's various ways things could be, right? I mean, so there could have been like a Newtonian universe, right? There could have been an Aristotelian universe. There could have been a completely empty, just an empty world, right? No universe. And there could have been various other things as well. And then the question is just, well, like what should we expect, right? Like a priori, like which of these is the most likely to be the case? I can't see any grounds here for supposing that that an empty world is more likely than any of the other ones. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and none of those cases is there a mechanism that brings about the world. I mean, it's just one of like there are various ways the world could be, and the world has to be one of those ways. There's no mechanism there. It's just it has to be something or
Mm-hmm.
nothing. It has to be something or something else or nothing. So that's just a sort of,
Yeah.
I suppose that would just be necessary. There's no mechanism required to bring that about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, moving on from this like sort of cosmological reasoning. Okay, so we can make a, I guess for moral realism. Uh, I also see a sort of similar argument to the one made by Humer, the ontological argument he proposed, which is basically something like, if I were to generalize it, there is some probability of moral facts, of there being moral facts, and so if I were to generalize it, I would say there is some probability of there being moral facts. Therefore, it is, in some sense, it is a moral, objective, stance independent fact to act as if that possibility is there, right? So, what would that mean? That would mean, so maybe it would just mean allowing people to try to discover moral facts, right? Maybe that would be a stance independent objective fact, because if we accept that there is at least some significant probability of there being moral facts, then that would seem to follow from that, right?
Well, I mean, so you're asking me if I agree with Hume's argument. I mean, I don't, obviously.
Yeah.
So do we want to, should we go through the argument? I mean, like, I mean, obviously, so maybe I should ask, like, what do you see so let's say we grant, okay, there's some, I should have some credence that for all I know there might be moral facts.
Yeah.
Okay, so and how exactly are you just agreeing with Hume's argument? You think that that's a correct argument, or are you getting to the conclusion that there's some objective moral fact in a different way?
Well, no, the conclusion, I think I'm just agreeing basically, which is that if there is that probability, then it is true that you ought to act uh, as if that probability
Okay,
is there.
so in that case, hang on a minute. Let me get up Hume's argument. Where is this? Okay, so yes, so the argument starts with this the probabilistic reasons principle, which is basically so if the following conditions hold, if S knew that P, this would provide a reason for S to phi. If S knew that not P, this would provide no reason for S not to phi, and S has some reason to believe that P. S thereby has a reason to phi, right? That's the first part. And then Hume applies that to the case of baby torture, right?
Yeah,
So if we knew that baby torture was objectively wrong, that would provide a reason for us to refrain from baby torture. If we knew that it's not the case that baby torture was objectively wrong, that would provide us with no reason to engage in baby torture, right? The
yeah,
mere fact that something is not objectively wrong doesn't provide a reason to engage in it.
exactly.
And we have some reason to believe that baby torture is objectively wrong, because we have some reason to take seriously moral realism, and if moral realism is true, then we have some reason to take seriously that baby torture is thereby wrong, right?
Yeah,
Um,
but instead
so
of,
we can
I
conclude.
guess, instead of applying it to a specific example, which I think
Mm,
is quite problematic, instead of just applying it to something like baby torture or some specific example, we can take a more sort of conservative perspective and just say, like, as a general moral rule, you should act as if there is a probability of there being moral facts. So you should, for example, allow people to try to, at least to try to find a moral way of life, even if you don't think that, even if you are not convinced of it, if there is at least a good probability that that's the case, then you are objectively morally obliged to do that.
mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, I think the specific example probably isn't going to change my view of this, because I just don't think there's a good reason to accept that the probabilistic reasons principle is what this argument is based on, and I don't accept that the probabilistic reasons principle is objectively true. So I would just not get on board with the argument. I mean, I think that I mean, it may well be that we accept the probabilistic reasons principle in some sense, but I don't think it's objectively true. So
Okay, so
I
so
don't think we're
why?
going to
But
get
why?
yeah.
I mean, uh, I guess why do you not agree with that principle? I mean, it seems, at least at first glance, it seems like a good principle to abide by.
Yeah, so basically the principle is saying, if conditions A, B, and C hold, then you have a reason to do such and such. Um, but I'm just an anti-realist about normativity and reasons in general. So even when it comes to prudential reasons, for instance, I'm an anti-realist about that as well. Uh, so I mean that I just don't accept that there's like, I mean, but like, yeah, of course we might accept the probabilistic reasons principle. Like if I care about, I don't know, maximizing utility or whatever, then I might act in accordance with something like the probabilistic reasons principle. But I don't know, I might not care about that. Um,
Oh, okay, okay, I see. So essentially, you're saying that even that principle is making a sort of moral claim, a normative claim.
well,
Uh,
I don't think it's necessarily making a moral claim. I mean, I mean, it is normative, yeah.
yeah,
And look, I mean, hey, there's a lot of people who are moral anti-realists, but who are realists about other types of normative claims. So yeah, there are some moral anti-realists who will say that that yeah, we're perfectly happy to get on board with the idea that there are objective reasons with respect to you know prudential value or whatever. So when it comes to something like, so for instance, a claim like you know you you ought to put on a coat, that's objectively true, just in case you have the sort of desire to put on a coat and it doesn't interfere with any of your other desires, and and as long as and putting on a coat is a means to the end of staying dry, right? So if we have those conditions in place, then we have this objective reason, right? And so if that's your view, then obviously I guess you'd have to come up with some other response to this type of argument. But I'm just an anti-realist about normativity and reasons in general. So yeah.
okay. So I guess I don't exactly know how to sort of respond to that, because if you are an anti-realist about normativity in general, then I guess I don't really understand uh, how you can navigate like stuff like knowledge, or how you can navigate how you act based on your knowledge and stuff. So how
Mm.
do you navigate it? Like, even just practically speaking, forget about the sort of the fundamental issue here. Um, just practically speaking, how can you navigate stuff about knowledge and stuff about what you should do epistemically, for instance, um, if you don't accept any normative and normative claims?
Okay, do we? I don't know if it would be worth, choosing something specific here. There's a lot of things. I mean, because there's a question about, how do I navigate, like, my sort of day-to-day life? How do I form beliefs? I mean, I
Yeah,
feel like there's a
I
lot
mean
going
about
on here. Can
beliefs.
we?
I mean about beliefs.
Yeah. How do I choose what to believe?
Yeah.
Basically. Um, yeah. So basically, I feel like I don't have a lot of, you know, there's not necessarily that much conscious control over it. I mean, sometimes I just read an argument, I find it compelling in the psychological sense, right? Like, so I'll sometimes read something and then I'll find myself being moved to hold a particular belief. I think I mean, I do actually have some control over my beliefs if I kind of step back and play around with, like, I can adopt different perspectives, right? I can adopt different sort of models of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, you know, I mean, it's not like, as far as I'm aware, that there's any kind of rule or principle that's sort of guiding my belief formation. I just have, certain positions seem more appealing to me, or certain arguments seem more appealing to me, and then maybe I explore them, and then maybe I start forming beliefs as a result. Um, Sometimes I will explicitly adopt beliefs just because they happen to make me more comfortable, I mean, or I get some sort of practical benefit out of them.
Mm-hmm.
um, I think it can be quite useful. I have some social anxiety, and sometimes, before entering a place where there's a big crowd of people, I will intentionally work through arguments for external world skepticism in order to become an external world skeptic. And then
Okay.
that makes it a lot easier,
Yeah,
because
that makes a lot of sense
hey, I just
actually.
believe
Yeah.
there's no active people around, right?
Yeah.
So, um, I mean, it's hard to sort of to kind of. I'm not. I'm also, by the way, I'm not a very reflective person about myself. I don't think very much about why I do what I do
Mm-hmm.
or what my motivations. I tend to just kind of act. And I don't think about it that much. I don't reflect much on my past, and I don't think much about my future. So it's kind of hard. I mean, I'm sort of just making this up as I go along.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be some sort of combination of, there will be situations where I'm confronted with an argument or an experience that just kind of moves me to hold a belief or to give up a belief. And then sometimes I will intentionally, like, push myself towards certain beliefs or against certain beliefs because I happen to find it more comfortable
Mm-hmm.
or practically useful or something.
Okay. Okay. So, in regards to that, okay. So, from what I understand, there is no guiding principle. There is no like specific mechanism by which like you follow step one, step two, step three, and you form a belief. It's sort of more intuitive and more what seems more appealing or what seems more pragmatic at the moment. But
Mm.
I guess the question I would have about that is that, isn't there a danger to that, in that you might convince yourself um, about stuff that you are not actually really convinced about? Because um, if you can convince yourself about almost anything based on the pragmatic value that it has, so for example, you said you have some social anxiety, and so you're going to try to convince yourself that about arguments about the external world not existing. So if that can actually work, and you actually follow these sort of intuitive pathways, isn't there a danger that this could be like just a coping mechanism, like your beliefs that you end up having end up being a coping mechanism instead of actually being truth tracking.
I'm not worried about that. I mean, that's basically what I'm doing. Yeah. I mean, so in the specific example of becoming an external world skeptic in order to deal with social anxiety, that is, I mean, I don't care about truth tracking, right? I mean, I'm specifically doing it in order
For a
to gain
purpose.
some practical benefit. But bear in mind, I mean, the same is true for when I hold the belief that there really is an external world, because so my view on this is that I really do take skepticism very seriously. I find myself just convinced by the arguments for skepticism. I don't think there's a good reason to believe in the external world. So which option you take, for me, just comes down to how I feel in the moment and what benefits I'm looking for. There are certain contexts where I find it very fulfilling to believe that I'm engaging with another person and that there's some reciprocal, like there's something reciprocal going on, like we have a relationship. So I like to believe sometimes that there are other people out there and that they have minds like mine and that there's communication and understanding. And then there are other times when I don't like to believe that. But so I can kind of I can adopt or drop these models, as the feeling takes me. And I mean, now if you say to me, well, look, you know, isn't there a danger that you're going to end up adopting beliefs that are false? I mean, I'm pretty damn sure that I will. I mean, I don't know, they can't all be true, can they? Maybe
Yeah.
they can, but but presumably, right? Let's just grant that, yeah, they can't all be true. Only one of them is true. But the point is not to adopt a true belief there. And even if I was to try to adopt a true belief, I don't think that I'm capable of doing so. I don't think that I have any reliable way of figuring out whether there actually is an external world. So, I mean, if I was to try to form my beliefs in a way that I regarded as truth tracking, um, I would again just end up. I would basically just end up in the skeptical position, right? That would just put me in the skeptical position because I don't think that I have any reliable way of doing that. Like again, I find those skeptical arguments very compelling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have maybe you have no so you think you have no reliable way of actually accessing truths um, objectively without some sort of having some sort of other reason to do so, or some sort of just intuition guiding you there. Um, so I guess the question I would ask, does that also apply to the the skeptical argument, like the case for skepticism? Does that also apply to that, or do you exempt that from the other beliefs?
No, it's not. It's not exempted. It's just that as a fact of my psychology, for one reason or another, when I engage with those arguments, I find myself losing my belief. Um, but if you were to say to me, well, you know, look, are the skeptical arguments, do they provide, you know, like, I don't know, objective reason to give up belief? Then I don't think they do. No. I'm just describing my psychology here, and
Yeah.
I mean, for what it's worth, I think that's actually a pretty sort of standard view among radical skeptics, right? Like, I think you can find so there is this sort of challenge to anybody who defends radical skepticism, which is, well, if you're saying that there's just no, like there's just no belief that's justified, that there are no good arguments, then what the hell are you doing presenting arguments for skepticism? And the a common sort of line of response there is just, well, what I can do is I can present an argument that has had a certain psychological effect on me. I don't have to present this argument as an argument that you know is going to rationally compel people to adopt a particular conclusion. And actually, I don't think the skeptical argument. I mean, I don't think they do that, right? I mean, look, there's lots of people who will engage with these arguments and they will reject them, and I think fine. I don't think there's anything irrational about that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm just, when I appeal to these arguments, I am just appealing to them uh, as these sort of tools that have had a certain effect on me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we go by this, if we go for this in a sort of context by context scenario. Um, could you, for example, put yourself in a specific like contextual space whereby you say, okay, so now in this context, in this sort of space in my head, I just want to find what's most probably true. Do you think that's not possible? Do you think like you have no, there is there is absolutely no way of uh, even trying to get into a sort of space like that?
Yeah, I can do that. I mean, I can imagine putting myself in another person's shoes. Sure.
Yeah, but would that actually be you? Uh, like, would the arguments and the sort of claims you would make when you were on that space, wouldn't they be actually closer to truth? Or do you think that even they would be ultimately influenced by like your psychology, or the the sort of intuitions that you have inherently?
Mm. I don't really see any way of engaging with an argument in a way that is completely independent of my own psychology and intuitions. I don't know how to, I don't know how to, divorce myself from my own mind, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now, I think the problem though is that I can, of course, put myself into another person's position, and I can sort of say, well, okay, let's say I just imagine that I'm searching for the truth, and I'm trying to get at what the world is like, and I'm trying to form correct beliefs. Well, the problem that I personally would have with this is I could do this, right? But um, I'm going to find that, like, depending on what initial assumptions I start with, I'm probably going to end up at very different conclusions. So I can very easily, for instance, put myself in the shoes of somebody who is a bog standard external world realist. Somebody who just thinks like, yeah, we live in a world of material objects. I'm sitting about 2 foot away from a computer. There's a glass of water right there, and these are sort of mind independent material things. I can do that. But then I can also put myself in the mind of somebody who's convinced by something like the simulation argument, or I can put myself in the shoes of somebody who's convinced by Berkeley's arguments for idealism. I can put myself in the shoes of a solipsist. So these are people who think that they have gotten to the facts about what the world is like, but their conclusions obviously are very, very different. And so I'm just not sure like what should, I don't know, what am I supposed to conclude from that? Like, yes, I can see how they have got themselves to those conclusions, but I don't find their arguments convincing. So I don't know. I mean, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So it was great talking to you. It was very interesting conversation. I've never actually talked to like an actual skeptic, like a sort of radical skeptic. So it was very interesting.
I mean, I guess I'm in some ways kind of sorry. I feel like it might maybe I sometimes wonder with these sorts of conversations, should I just like put it aside and like pretend to be sort of a more kind of have like more bog standard views, or I I mean
No,
I
no,
mean
no.
bog standard, that's a bit insulting. I don't mean it to be insulting. I mean, should I pretend to just sort of be somebody who can get on board with, you know, these sorts of ideas. When it comes to things like explanation and contingent
Yeah,
facts and all that stuff, like I because I know the other ways of approaching that. I obviously have a pretty I have a particular way of approaching
yeah.
that that's
No, I
really
think
going to
it's
lead you to
actually
quite extreme conclusions. And
yeah. I think it's
yeah,
actually it's better for you to be authentic. In my opinion, that's, I mean, normatively, I think that's a good thing. So thank you for talking with me today.
well, no problem. I hope you have a good day, and like I said, thanks for inviting me, and